Australia is bigger than most people allow themselves to reckon with. It is a continent, 7.5 million square kilometers. A country where you can drive for 12 hours in any direction from a major city and find yourself somewhere that feels genuinely unreachable. Somewhere that used to be a town, or used to be a dream, or used to be both of those things at once, and then stopped being either. Most people who visit Australia see Sydney, Melbourne, the Reef, the Rock, a handful of national parks. They miss the copper smelter in the Queensland scrub that changed its name mid-war and then evaporated the moment peace broke out. They miss the town the government erased from every map, every road sign, every GPS database, and whose streets are still slowly killing people. They miss the telegraph station being eaten alive by sand dunes because someone, in 1859, released a few rabbits. And at number 1 on this list is a place in the Pilbara that officially does not exist anymore. The government made it not exist, on purpose. That is where we are going. These are the 15 Australian ghost towns so forgotten you won't find them on Google Maps. Number 15. Broad Arrow, Western Australia, the loneliest last call. 40 kilometres north of Kalgoorlie, there is a pub. There is also a water tower. And that is roughly everything left of a town that once had 2,400 residents and 17 hotels. Broad Arrow was swept into existence by the Western Australian gold rush of the 1890s, one of the biggest gold rushes in Australian history. Prospectors threw up hotels and houses almost overnight. Then the alluvial gold ran out. Unlike Kalgoorlie, which sat atop one of the richest gold-bearing lodes on Earth, Broad Arrow had no such depth to fall back on. By 1905, it was essentially over. The hotels closed one by one. Buildings were dismantled or left to rot. One pub kept its license. It still has it. The walls of the Broad Arrow Tavern are papered floor to ceiling with currency from around the world. Zimbabwean dollars, Japanese yen, expired French francs, left by travellers over decades. You can drive out from Kalgoorlie, order a cold beer, and stand surrounded by money from 30 countries in a town that no longer has anyone to spend it. Number 14. Old Tallangatta, Victoria, the town they couldn't drown. In the 1950s, the Australian government decided to expand the Hume Dam on the Murray River. This was good for irrigation. It was bad for the town of Tallangatta in northeast Victoria, which sat directly in the flood path. The government told residents to move. Most farming families had been there for generations. Some refused until the water was lapping at their doors. Rather than simply abandon the town, the community did something remarkable. They physically moved more than 100 houses and dozens of businesses, 8 kilometres west, to a new site. Traction engines, trucks, decades of accumulated life, all relocated. The town they rebuilt is now known as the town they couldn't drown. The original town site went underwater and stayed there. In 2007, a drought dropped Lake Hume to just 1% capacity. Locals waded out across the exposed lakebed and walked the old streets, finding the ghost of a bank, a hotel, a highway, perfectly preserved beneath decades of silt. The water came back. The streets are gone again. But the people who walked them remember exactly where they were standing. Number 13. Silverton, New South Wales. The apocalypse set that became a town. Here is the short version of what happened to Silverton. Silver was found in 1880. Within 3 years, the town had 3,000 people. Then an even richer deposit opened up 26 kilometres away at Broken Hill. And the exodus was so total and so fast that residents didn't just leave. They took their homes with them. Iron and canvas houses were dismantled, loaded onto carts, and driven up the road. By 1901, only 286 people remained. What they left behind was a collection of colonial buildings sitting in extraordinary desert light, surrounded by flat ochre plains so vast you can see the curvature of the earth from the lookout. Filmmakers noticed. Mad Max 2 was filmed here in 1981. So were Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, Razorback, and more than 140 other films and commercials by 2007. The town has a private Mad Max 2 museum, a pub with a replica of the film's car parked outside, and fewer than 50 permanent residents, most of them artists. Here is the detail that stops people cold. Silverton's schoolteacher from 1887 to 1889 was a young assistant named Mary Jane Cameron. She is now on the Australian $10 note, immortalised as Dame Mary Gilmore, one of Australia's most celebrated poets. She left when the school was about to close. Silverton kept going anyway. Number 12. Walhalla, Victoria. The alpine town that lit the world first, then went dark. The road into Walhalla descends into a gorge in Gippsland's Great Dividing Range, and you cannot see the town until you are almost upon it. Then it appears, a line of heritage buildings along a creek, surrounded by mountain ash and towering eucalyptus, the sound of water running the length of the main street. 20 people live here permanently. In the 1880s, 4,000 lived in and around this valley. Gold was discovered in Stringer's Creek in 1862 by an ex-convict named Ned Stringer, who died of tuberculosis that same year. What followed him was one of Victoria's richest goldfields. The Long Tunnel Extended Mine operated from 1871 to 1911 and extracted 13.7 tons of gold. In 1884, Walhalla became the first country location in Australia to have electric street lighting, powered by the mine's own boilers. The cricket ground was built by levelling the top of a hill, because there was no flat ground anywhere in the valley. The railway arrived in 1910, 4 years before the last major mine closed. Then the railway spent its remaining years doing the opposite of what railways usually do. It carried the buildings away. The original Walhalla railway station was dismantled and re-erected in Hartwell, a quiet suburb of Melbourne. Commuters passed through it every day with no idea where it came from. Number 11. Ravenswood, Queensland. From 4,700 people to a pub and a prayer. In 1903, Ravenswood had 4,700 people. It had a hospital, a courthouse, its own branch railway from Townsville, and more than 30 hotels. It was considered a serious contender for the future of Queensland's north. By 1960, only 70 people remained. Most of them were too stubborn to leave. Ravenswood sits 88 kilometres east of Charters Towers in a landscape of open tropical savanna, and the reason for its existence was gold, specifically the most awkward gold in Queensland. The ore was embedded in sulfide compounds in a way that defeated standard extraction methods for decades. The town's genius was pioneering new technology to reach it, including the first use of the cyanide extraction process in Queensland. That technology worked. It just required enormous capital. A.L. Wilson's new Ravenswood company poured foreign investment into the field around the turn of the century, built grand Victorian and Edwardian architecture, the Imperial Hotel, the courthouse, the churches, and then ran out of money when WWY labour shortages and the collapse of gold quality made the operation unsustainable. The company folded in 1917. The railway tracks were pulled up in 1930. Timber buildings were sold off. The brick ones, which could not easily be moved, stayed. Today they stand in the Queensland heat. 14 sites on the Heritage Register, 2 hotels still serving, and a landscape dotted with smelter chimneys and mullock heaps. The outback ghost town quietly helped fund the construction of Port Kembla's metal manufacturers plant, which became one of Australia's major industrial companies. Most people in that industry have never heard of Ravenswood. Number 10. Kuridala, Queensland. The town that changed its name to survive a war. Drive 40 kilometres of unsealed road past the township of Malbon, and there is nothing to tell you where you are going. Then 2 tall iron chimneys appear on the horizon, rising from the flat Queensland scrub, like something left behind from another century, which is exactly what they are. Copper was discovered at Kuridala in 1884. The town went through 3 names in short succession: Hampton, then Friesland, then, in October 1916, at the height of anti-German sentiment in Australia, Kuridala, which is an Aboriginal word thought to mean eagle hawk. Here is the thing. The name change was meant to help the town survive the war. It did, spectacularly. Wartime demand for copper drove massive profits. The Hampton smelter produced 50,800 tons of copper, 21,000 ounces of gold, and 381,000 ounces of silver in 9 years of operation. At its peak, the town had 6 hotels, 4 billiard saloons, 3 dance halls, a cinema, 2 iceworks, and over 360 graves in its cemetery. Then the war ended. The British government dropped copper price controls. The Commonwealth Bank withdrew its credit line. Within years, the population fell from 2,000 to 800, then to a handful, then to 1. The last inhabitant, a woman named Lizzie Belch, left around 1982. The Hampton smelter contained the only surviving water jacket blast furnace of its type in Queensland. The copper it processed quietly helped fund the industrial infrastructure that built Port Kembla. There is no sign pointing to Kuridala. You have to know to look. If you are enjoying this so far, hit the thumbs up, because we are about to move into the ones that didn't just fade. They were drowned, buried, and erased. Number 9. Nunes, New South Wales, Australia's forgotten oil dream, hidden in a canyon. The Walgan Valley is about 187 kilometres northwest of Sydney, at the bottom of a sandstone gorge with walls that block the sky. The valley has a river, a campsite, and the ruins of one of the more ambitious industrial failures in Australian history. In 1906, the Commonwealth Oil Corporation built an oil shale processing plant here, intending to make Australia self-sufficient in petroleum by boiling oil out of rock. They built 64 retorts, 90 coke ovens, a 50-kilometre narrow-gauge railway through the mountains, a hotel, a school, and a town they named after their London chairman, Sir George Nunes. At its peak, 2,000 workers and their families lived here. Operation shut down permanently in 1932. Cheaper imported crude oil had made the whole enterprise uneconomical, and the mountain geography that had seemed to offer isolation and privacy had actually made it almost impossibly expensive to run. What remains today includes those 90 beehive-shaped coke ovens, the largest collection of their kind in Australia, a 15-metre brick retaining wall, and a disused railway tunnel now colonised by bioluminescent glowworms. The tunnel glows blue in the dark. The rails from the Nunes line were dismantled in 1940 and repurposed as beach anti-tank obstacles on the North African coast during the Second World War. The dream of an Australian oil empire ended as scrap metal on a wartime beach. The glowworms moved in. Number 8. Cook, South Australia. Queen City of Nowhere. Cook, South Australia, sits 824 kilometres from Port Augusta on the Nullarbor Plain. It sits beside the longest straight stretch of railway in the world, 478 kilometres of dead straight track in a single unbroken line across the flattest terrain on the continent. The town was built in 1917 because steam locomotives needed water and crew changes roughly every few hundred kilometres, and the Nullarbor offered nothing. So the Commonwealth built everything from scratch: a school, a hospital, a golf course, a swimming pool, 2 jail cells, and a general store for the approximately 200 people who lived here. The hospital's motto was painted on a sign at the station: "If you're crook, come to Cook." In 1997, the railways were privatised. The new operators needed a fuel stop and a driver change. Not a town. The population collapsed from around 200 to approximately 5 almost immediately. Water is now delivered entirely by train. Today, 4 people officially reside in Cook. The Indian Pacific stops here twice weekly. Passengers have about 30 minutes to walk the empty streets. The 2-storey school stands crumbling. The swimming pool has been filled in. The decommissioned hospital still keeps emergency medical supplies stocked, not for residents, of which there are almost none, but in case a passenger has a medical emergency somewhere in the middle of the continent. In 1982, the residents planted 600 gum trees to bring some green to the limestone plain. The people left. The trees stayed. They are the only shade for 500 kilometres. Number 7. Arltunga, Northern Territory. the first town in the Red Centre, founded on a lie. In 1887, a South Australian explorer named David Lindsay passed through the East MacDonnell Ranges, about 110 kilometres east of what would become Alice Springs, and reported that he had seen rubies. He had not. They were garnets. But word spread, and prospectors started arriving, some of them pushing wheelbarrows 600 kilometres through desert heat to reach the find. By the time anyone confirmed the rubies were worthless, gold had been discovered in the creek beds. They stayed. Arltunga became Central Australia's first European settlement, built at the end of a track no wheeled vehicle could reliably navigate, in temperatures that regularly exceeded 45 degrees Celsius, where the only water source had a name that translates from the local Aboriginal language as smelly water. The machinery for the government battery and cyanide works, approved in 1896, was railed to Udnadatta and then transported the rest of the way by 29 camels over 4 weeks. In 1890, a drought dried up every well on the field. Horses starved. All carts stopped moving. The town endured. Here is the wild part. Because Arltunga needed a supply town, the South Australian government surveyed and established the settlement of Stewart, which is now Alice Springs, the most famous outback town in Australia, the gateway to Uluru, the tourist hub of the Red Centre. It exists primarily because of a gemstone that turned out to be worthless. Alice Springs owes Arltunga an apology it will never deliver. Number 6. Farina, South Australia, the flower town that God threw stones at. There is a line across South Australia called Goyder's Line. Surveyor George Goyder drew it in 1865 to mark the boundary of reliable rainfall, the point beyond which farming was a losing bet. The government accepted this. Then a series of unusually wet years in the 1870s convinced optimistic settlers that the desert had changed. It had not. They rushed north, bought allotments, and in 1878 established a town they named Farina, Latin for wheat or flour. It was a pointed name, a declaration, a wager against Goyder's judgment. The town grew. At its peak it had 600 residents, 2 hotels, 2 breweries, 5 blacksmiths, an underground bakery, a school, a church and a brothel, all sitting in the Lake Eyre Basin 600 kilometres north of Adelaide. The community was genuinely cosmopolitan. Aboriginal Australians, European settlers, Chinese workers who had come for the railway, and Afghan cameleers who transported goods beyond the rail line. When the Afghan cameleers died, they were buried in their own section of the Farina cemetery, headstones inscribed in both English and Arabic, every grave facing Mecca, a small square of the Islamic world, preserved in the South Australian desert. In 1909, a 1,143 kilogram iron meteorite was found northeast of the town. By the 1930s, a visitor described Farina as the last place on earth God made, and then he turned around and threw stones at it. The last permanent residents left in the 1980s. History sided entirely with Goyder. Number 5. Old Eucla, Western Australia. The town the sand ate alive. 11 kilometres west of the South Australian border, in a landscape of white sand dunes rolling toward the Great Australian Bight, there is a set of stone walls. How much of them you can see depends on which way the wind has been blowing. The old Eucla telegraph station was established in 1877 as the crucial link on the east-west telegraph line, the wire that finally connected all 5 Australian colonies. At its peak, it handled 600 telegrams a day. The station was a conversion point. South Australia and Victoria used American Morse code, Western Australia used International Morse, and every message had to be manually transcribed and resent by a human operator. The operators were educated men who produced their own newsletter, the Eucla Recorder, to manage the isolation. Then rabbits arrived. Thomas Austin had released 24 rabbits on his Victorian property in 1859. By the 1890s, they had spread across the continent, and at Eucla they ate the grass and scrub anchoring the Delissa sandhills. With nothing holding the dunes in place, the sand began moving. Residents swept it off their streets. They filled in their windows. They watched it consume the town. The telegraph station closed in 1927 when a new line was built further north. A new town site had already been established 4 kilometers away. The original town went under. In the 7 years between 2015 and 2022, the ruins deteriorated more than in the previous 11 years combined. The front wall of the main building collapsed. Within decades, there may be nothing left to see. The rabbits won nearly a century ago. The sand is still winning now. Number 4. Gwalia, Western Australia. The ghost town where a president learned his trade. In May 1897, a 23-year-old American mining engineer named Herbert Hoover arrived at a remote Western Australian goldfield settlement by camel. He had been sent by the London firm Buick Moring and Company to inspect a mine called the Sons of Gwalia, discovered the previous year by 3 Coolgardie prospectors. Hoover recommended his firm purchase it, was appointed its first manager, and spent 18 months here before being posted to China. He later became the 31st President of the United States. The mine he recommended is still operating today, as one of the deepest trucking mines in the world, more than 1,600 meters below the surface. But the ghost town above it is what stays with people. When the Sons of Gwalia mine closed in December 1963 following a headframe accident, approximately 1,200 people left within weeks. They left nearly everything behind. The Italian and Yugoslav workers' cottages still stand with their gardens. The State Hotel still stands. Australia's only surviving original timber incline headframe still stands, a jagged silhouette on the flat goldfield sky. The place froze. A preservation effort began in 1971. It is now one of the most authentic mining ghost towns in the country. Not tidied for tourists, but genuinely suspended. Hoover's brick manager's house still stands on its hill above the mine. He designed it at age 23. London complained it cost £750, several times the price of an average home, and was an unnecessary extravagance. The house is now a bed and breakfast. Guests sleep in the rooms designed by the man who would later manage the Great Depression. Number 3. Old Adaminaby, New South Wales, the town they drowned for power. Old Adaminaby was not a ghost town. It was a working farming community in the Eucla Valley of the New South Wales Snowy Mountains, established in 1830, home to families who had farmed the same land for multiple generations. Between 1956 and 1958, the Snowy Mountains Hydroelectric Authority built Eucla Dam across the valley. Lake Eucla became Australia's largest reservoir, covering approximately 24,500 hectares. The town of Adaminaby was in the way. The government gave residents months to relocate. Compensation was considered inadequate. The new town's blocks were smaller. There was no room for the cows and horses families had kept for generations. Most farming families refused to leave until the water was at their doorsteps. Some had to abandon stoves and farm equipment when rising water cut off road access. 3 church buildings were relocated brick by brick to the new town. Buildings deemed worthless were bulldozed. The flooding of the valley also submerged Aboriginal campsites of cultural significance to the Ngarigo and Bemerangal peoples, sites of ceremony, of seasonal gathering, of thousands of years of continuous use. The water came up and covered all of it. Then in 2008, a drought dropped Lake Eucla to approximately 1% capacity. People drove to the lake's edge and found the old town again. Foundations under the silt, the faint outlines of roads, and standing in the dry lake bed, still rooted in their original positions along what had been a street, the blackened skeletons of trees. 60 years underwater, still there, pointing upward, reaching for the surface of a lake that was not there anymore. The lake has since refilled. The trees are down there again. Number 2. Mary Kathleen, Queensland. The town named after a dead woman, sold for spare parts. In July 1954, 2 prospectors named Clem Walton and Norm McConaughey discovered a significant uranium deposit in the Selwyn Range of northwest Queensland, halfway between Mount Isa and Cloncurry. McConaughey named the site after his wife Mary Kathleen, who had died of illness just days before the discovery. Rio Tinto formed Mary Kathleen Uranium Limited to develop the mine. An architect-designed township grew between 1956 and 1958. It had a state school, a 35-meter swimming pool, a drive-in cinema, a golf course, 2 churches, a lawn bowls club, and a hospital that delivered more than 200 babies. Approximately 1,200 people lived here at peak. It was orderly, functional, and genuinely livable. It existed entirely because of uranium. When the ore body was exhausted in 1982, the company determined the town was not financially practical to maintain. Residents, 830 of them, with mortgages and children in school, were given notice to find somewhere else to live. In April 1983, the entire township was auctioned. Buildings were dismantled brick by brick. Streetlights, swimming pool tiles, church pews, school desks, everything sold and carted away. What remained were concrete house slabs arranged in neat suburban patterns, bitumen roads leading nowhere, a town fountain, and the outline of a roundabout in the middle of empty scrubland. The abandoned open-cut mine pit has filled with electric blue water caused by uranium minerals leaching from the walls. Visitors are warned not to touch it. Mary Kathleen's Australian rules football team won 3 consecutive premierships in the Mount Isa League from 1977 to 1979. It is one of the few clubs in Australian history to win senior titles in a town that no longer exists. You can camp on the slabs for free tonight. There is no one to ask permission from. Number 1. Wittenoom, Western Australia, the town that doesn't exist anymore. On purpose. You are driving through the Pilbara. The road signs for Wittenoom have been removed. The name is not on the highway markers. Your GPS has no entry. You are navigating by an old map or by someone who has been there before. When you arrive, if you arrive, you find the Hamersley Range Gorges, which are genuinely among the most beautiful landscapes in Australia. Ancient red rock walls, hundreds of meters high, carved over millions of years into shapes that seem designed rather than eroded. Wildflowers in season, a silence so complete you can hear your own breathing. There is no town. The buildings have been demolished. The streets are gone. There is no sign, no information board, no heritage marker. The place you are standing is not supposed to exist. Now look at the ground. The grey-blue material on the road surface, in the creek beds, mixed into the soil. That is asbestos tailings. 3 million tons of it, still here, still loose, still moved by wind and water. It does not look like anything dangerous. It looks like gravel. Wittenoom was Australia's only supplier of blue asbestos, crocidolite, the most dangerous form, from the 1950s until 1966. The mine was founded in the 1930s when Lang Hancock identified the deposits. A company town was built in 1947. At its peak in 1961, 881 people lived here. Over its full operating life, approximately 20,000 people passed through. More than 2,000 of them are now dead from asbestos-related diseases, mesothelioma, asbestosis, lung cancer, with the death toll still rising because the disease has a latency period of 20 to 50 years. Internal company documents later showed that CSR, the company that operated the mine, was aware of the health risks from the 1940s. They continued operating until it was no longer profitable. The mine closed in 1966, not because of the deaths, but because the returns had dried up. The government began trying to close the town in the 1970s. A handful of residents refused to leave for decades. In 2007, the town site was officially degazetted, removed from every official map, every road sign, every GPS system. In 2022, the Wittenoom Closure Bill enabled the compulsory acquisition and demolition of the last 14 privately owned properties. The contaminated site now covers 46,840 hectares, roughly 1/5 the size of the Chernobyl exclusion zone, and the largest asbestos-contaminated site in the southern hemisphere. The Banjima people, the traditional custodians of this land, remain barred from it. Here is the detail that does not leave you. Children at Wittenoom school used asbestos tailings as a craft material. The blue fibres were spread across the playground, used in art projects, taken home on clothes. Some of those children are still dying of mesothelioma today. The government's response to all of this eventually was to erase the town from the record. Not remediate it, not clean it, erase it. As if the name on a map was the problem. The gorges are still there. The fibres are still there. The people are still dying. The map just doesn't say so anymore. Australia is vast enough to hide all of this in plain sight. A continent's worth of decisions, disasters, and abandoned ambitions. Most of them unknown outside the communities that lived them. For me, it is old Adaminaby. The image of those trees, still rooted in the lake bed after 60 years underwater, still reaching upward. That one will stay. Which of these towns surprised you most, and which ones have we missed? If you want more like this, subscribe. There is always another place that used to be somewhere.